At 73, George Strait, the king of country, stands as one of the most legendary figures the music world has ever known. But behind the smooth voice, the timeless hits, and the calm Texas charm lies a deeply painful story that many fans never fully understood until now. For decades, George kept his private life locked away, choosing silence over attention, strength over sympathy. Yet the truth behind that silence is far more heartbreaking than most people ever imagined. Everything changed for George long before fame crowned him a legend. A single tragedy shattered his world, reshaping not only his life but the entire meaning behind his music. Even as he dominated the charts, sold out arenas, and broke records no country artist had ever touched, the weight of that loss never left his heart. Friends say that George carried it quietly, almost invisibly, but it followed him everywhere from the studio to the stage and back home every night. And now, in his 70s, the emotional toll is becoming more visible than ever. Those closest to him reveal that the years have softened his voice, but deepened the sorrow behind his lyrics. Some insiders say he talks less, travels less, and reflects more. Others claim he's confronting the very memories he spent most of his life trying to outrun. Fans know George Strait as a symbol of strength, tradition, and resilience. But today, the truth emerging from his private world is nothing short of devastating. What happened to George Strait didn't just break his heart, it changed him forever. George Strait's story begins far from the bright lights of fame, in the quiet fields and open skies of Texas, where he grew up with a deep love for music and an even deeper love for family. Long before the world called him the king of country, he was simply a young man searching for direction, shaped by hardship and determined to create a life built on faith, discipline, and loyalty. But even from the beginning, life had a way of testing him in ways that most people never face. His early years were marked by struggle, especially after his parents separated. The breakup had a silent impact on him, leaving emotional gaps he rarely talked about. Raised mostly by his father, George learned responsibility young, working hard, keeping his head down, and staying humble, traits that would later define him as a performer. Music became his escape, a private refuge where he could express the feelings he never voiced out loud. But even then, no one could have predicted how deeply that emotional outlet would one day be tied to grief. When George enlisted in the Army, it wasn't music he was chasing, it was stability. Life in the military taught him discipline, but it also brought unexpected blessings. During this time, he discovered his true passion for performing. He began singing with an Army band, and for the first time, he saw a future that felt both hopeful and honest. The applause was small, the rooms were simple, but for George, it meant everything. Still, even with this newfound purpose, he never imagined that music would lead him into the darkest chapter of his life. When he returned home and began performing in local bars and small Texas venues, his family became the center of his world. George and his wife, Norma, stood together through every challenge, grounding each other through uncertainty and long nights on the road. They built a life around love, faith, and their 2 children. George's success grew slowly but steadily, and every step he took toward fame was anchored by the quiet support of the people waiting for him at home. But life changed in an instant, so suddenly, so brutally, that George Strait was never the same again. The tragedy that struck his family is something he rarely speaks about, even decades later. It became the silent wound behind every song, the heartbreak behind every performance. Those closest to him say that it was the moment that forced George to look at life differently, to see time, family, and love through a sharper, more painful lens. And although the world kept praising his rise to stardom, the man behind the microphone was carrying a weight far heavier than anyone could see. As George's career took off, fans celebrated his calm presence and classic sound, unaware of the emotional struggle happening behind the scenes. Even while breaking record after record, he remained private, almost guarded. He seemed determined to keep his deepest pain far from the public eye, choosing instead to pour it quietly into the music that millions adored. And yet, every lyric, every performance, every soft smile on stage carried echoes of what he had lost today. Looking back at those early years, it becomes clear that George Strait's journey was never about fame, it was about survival. The man who stood so confidently on stage was also a father, a husband, and a grieving soul who learned how to keep moving even when life tried to stop him. His story is not just about success. It is about the resilience required to face a heartbreak that never fully heals. As George Strait's career began to climb, he was becoming a household name across America. But behind the quiet smile and the polished performances, the emotional weight he carried only grew heavier with time. Success brought long tours, endless studio sessions, and a demanding schedule that kept him away from home more than he ever wanted. Yet even through the exhaustion, George stayed grounded in what mattered most: his family. To him, fame was never the goal. Providing for his loved ones and staying true to his roots was what guided every choice he made. Still, nothing could prepare him for the painful twist of fate that would redefine his entire life. By the mid-1980s, George was not just rising, he was soaring. His music connected with fans on a deeper level than most artists could ever hope for. Listeners felt the sincerity in his voice, the honesty in his lyrics, and the calm dignity in the way he carried himself. He didn't chase trends or controversy. He simply sang from the heart. But even as he reached new heights, George was struggling privately with the demands of fame. He often spoke about how the road could feel lonely, even when surrounded by thousands of cheering fans. What he never admitted publicly, though, was that the long hours away from home bothered him more than the spotlight ever did. His daughter, Jennifer, was the light in his life, a source of joy, laughter, and pride. She gave George something no amount of fame could replace: a sense of purpose that grounded him. Through the chaos of stardom, friends say she shared his calm temperament and natural charm, and George would light up when talking about her. But in 1986, everything changed. In one devastating moment, George and his family were struck by an unthinkable loss that shattered their world. The heartbreak was so deep, so life-altering, that George never spoke about it publicly for years. It wasn't out of coldness, it was grief too painful to revisit. A wound he carried quietly for the rest of his life. After the tragedy, George's entire outlook shifted. He withdrew from interviews, avoided personal questions, and kept a tight circle around him. The man who once enjoyed connecting with fans and reporters suddenly became intensely private. Those who knew him best said it wasn't fame he was hiding from, it was the memories that came with speaking his daughter's name aloud. Every conversation, every question, every moment of attention felt like a reminder of what he had lost. So George did what he knew best. He poured his heart into his music and let the songs speak for him. The period that followed became one of the most emotionally charged chapters of his career. Although he continued releasing hit after hit, fans noticed something new in his voice: a deeper sincerity, a more vulnerable softness that hadn't been there before. The pain was invisible, but it lived in the pauses between his lyrics, in the way he closed his eyes during performances, in the gentle tone that carried every word. His music became both a refuge and a way of healing. Even though the healing was slow and incomplete, as the years passed, George stayed committed to family more than ever. He prioritized time at home, limited his public appearances, and leaned heavily on faith and privacy to carry him through difficult days. Norma, his wife, became his anchor, a steady presence who helped him navigate grief while supporting his career. With quiet strength, their bond grew even deeper, built on a lifetime of partnership and shared resilience. Fans may have seen the hits, the awards, and the sold-out arenas, but behind all of it stood a man who was quietly learning how to live with heartbreak that never truly faded. Even now, decades later, George Strait's pain remains one of the most defining parts of his journey. And while the world celebrates him for his music, those who know his story understand that his greatest act of strength was simply finding a way to keep going. As George Strait moved deeper into his career, he began shaping a legacy that few artists in any genre could match. Hit after hit poured out of him, each one reflecting the classic style that made him a symbol of country music tradition. But while the world saw a superstar breaking records, George himself saw something else entirely. For him, music became a lifeline, a way to stay connected to the emotions he kept locked away. Even though he always carried himself with calm confidence, There was a tenderness behind his eyes that revealed just how much life had changed him. During this period, George quietly transformed his work habits. He no longer pursued every opportunity or chased constant touring. Instead, he became selective, focusing on performances that truly mattered to him. Friends and band members noticed a shift. George was no longer driven by ambition. He was driven by meaning. Each show became a living tribute to the people he had lost. His body language softened shoulders, longer pauses between songs, and a deeper emotional weight in every melody. Despite the emotional heaviness, George continued carving out a remarkable musical career. He earned the respect of fellow artists for being humble, grounded, and authentic, qualities that set him apart in an industry known for fame and ego. Many younger performers looked to him as a quiet mentor, someone who led not through loud advice, but through example. His commitment to simplicity and sincerity became a standard that few could live up to. In a world where artists constantly reinvented themselves, George stayed true to who he was from the beginning, proving that honesty never goes out of style. But even as his legacy grew, George struggled with the spotlight. He had never enjoyed being the center of attention, and after the tragedy, public appearances felt more overwhelming than ever. The pressure of cameras, interviews, and constant questions didn't sit well with him. He preferred ranch life, the open fields, and the quiet moments where no one was asking him to revisit memories that still hurt. For George, silence wasn't loneliness, it was protection. It was a safe space where he didn't have to explain himself or pretend that everything was okay. This emotional distance only made fans love him more. People admired his humility and the way he stayed grounded despite staggering fame. Many saw him as a symbol of strength, a man who carried unimaginable sorrow with dignity, never allowing it to define him publicly. The truth, however, is that grief shaped him far more deeply than most people realized. It shaped his decisions, his personality, and even his sound. The man who once seemed purely joyful on stage now carried a gentle sadness in everything he did, a reminder of how fragile life can be. Through all of this, his relationship with Norma became even more essential. She stood beside him not as the wife of a celebrity, but as a partner who understood the weight he carried. Their bond was unshakable, built on decades of shared experiences, both beautiful and brutal. Norma became George's emotional refuge, a place where he didn't need to hide the parts of himself that the world couldn't see. Without her unwavering presence, many believe George may have stepped away from music altogether. As he entered his late 60s and 70s, George began preparing for a quieter life. He gradually reduced his touring schedule, choosing only special performances and deeply meaningful events. Fans sensed the shift and cherished every opportunity to hear him live. For many, seeing George Strait on stage wasn't just watching a legend, it was witnessing resilience in its purest form. By the time he reached 73, the emotional journey he had endured was etched into his voice, his music, and the way he carried himself. And though he continued to smile for his fans, the truth was simple. The heartbreak he suffered decades earlier never truly healed. It became a silent companion that shaped the man behind the songs, making his legacy not only iconic, but deeply human. As George Strait stepped into the later years of his life, his priorities shifted even more clearly toward the things that brought him peace. Long tours were replaced with rare, meaningful performances, and the spotlight that once followed him everywhere became something he encountered only occasionally. Fans saw a man who had accomplished everything an artist could dream of: record-breaking hits, massive stadium audiences, and a legacy carved into the heart of country music. But behind that remarkable success was someone who had grown tired of carrying pain that never fully faded. George had learned to live with it, but he never pretended it wasn't there. At 73, George appeared calm, reflective, and grateful, but those close to him knew the weight he carried. The loss he suffered early in his life shaped every decision he made moving forward. It taught him what truly mattered, and it made him fiercely protective of his privacy. Instead of giving interviews about his personal life, he poured his emotions into music that spoke louder than any press conference ever could. His songs from this period carried an unmistakable depth, as if he were gently opening a window into the parts of his heart he never shared publicly. Despite the deep scars, George built a warm and stable life surrounded by people he trusted. His ranch became his sanctuary. He loved spending quiet mornings walking the land, caring for his horses, and enjoying the freedom that came with open skies and silence. There was something healing about the simplicity of ranch life. The rhythm of nature, slow, steady, predictable, was a stark contrast to the unpredictable tragedy that once shattered his world. Out on the land, George found a peace that music alone couldn't give him. Even as he stepped back from the industry, fans continued to admire him for the same reasons they always had: his humility, his grace, and his refusal to compromise who he was. George never needed controversy or noise to stay relevant. His presence alone carried a kind of quiet power. Younger artists often sought his advice, looking up to him as the rare legend who held onto his integrity in a world that constantly tried to pull artists in different directions. George's influence didn't come from flashy statements, it came from decades of steady, genuine character. But time brought new challenges. Aging hasn't been easy for George, especially after a lifetime on the road. The physical strain of performing, traveling, and carrying emotional weight began to show in subtle ways. He became more careful, more selective, and more focused on preserving his health. Those who worked closely with him noticed moments where he would pause before walking on stage, taking a breath as if gathering every bit of energy and emotion he had left. And yet, every time he stepped out to perform, he gave everything he had because he understood how much his music meant to people. Fans often say that George Strait doesn't just sing songs, he lives them. His performances feel like conversations between his heart and the audience, a shared space where emotions flow without needing to be explained. And as he moved further into his 70s, this connection only grew stronger. People weren't just listening to a legendary artist, they were witnessing a man who turned unimaginable pain into something beautiful, something healing, something timeless. Family remained the center of his world. His bond with Norma became even more meaningful with age, strengthened by decades of loyalty, patience, and shared grief. They built a life rooted in love rather than fame, and that stability gave George the freedom to step back from the public eye without ever feeling like he was walking away from what mattered most. Their home was filled with memories, both joyful and painful, but each one played a part in shaping the man he became. As the years continued to pass, George Strait's story remains one of extraordinary resilience. He may be a legend in country music, but his greatest achievement has always been the quiet strength he carried through life's hardest moments. At 73, his tragedy still lingers in the background of his legacy, but so does his courage. And for millions of fans, that combination, heartbreak and strength, makes George Strait not just an icon, but an inspiration.